sky is falling when it comes to entry-level work, especially for college grads. Continuous learner and continuously update your skill set, whether it's AI related skills right now, whether it's been cloud in the past, whether it's been some data science related skills in the past. Man, salary premiums of $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 or more stand out in the hiring process are the ones who bring that more holistic skill set to the table. Hiring process for many companies has become very dehumanized. You are never going to have a problem hiring anyone again. You are a talent magnet.
All right, so let's get to the meat of this. Let's talk about the macro hiring environment. So this is your specialty. This is part of your specialty anyway. But let's talk about what's going on in hiring right now.
Yeah, and I think it's necessary to talk about some of the misconceptions we're seeing in the space right now, because you hear all the headlines and it's pretty anxiety provoking. You hear that people are telling you entry-level jobs are going away. You hear people telling you that AI is going to take your job. You hear people telling you that the labor market has fundamentally changed and we don't know what's going to happen next. And yeah, sure, the labor market is always going to change. There are always going to be some structural evolutions over time. But if we actually try to take a step back and say, okay, what's actually happening in the market right now, you get a more nuanced picture, which it's a good rule of thumb that whenever you see headlines, assume there's always more nuance to the picture. And really, there are a few high-level trends that we're tracking right now in the market. One is that, yes, there was a dip in terms of demand. If you look at things like job postings, if you look at just overall hiring activity for a lot of firms, it's not the level it was in 2022. But you know what? Almost was never the level it was in 2022. It seems like we have this collective fog brain when it comes to what happened in 2020. We got hit with a once-in-a-century pandemic that completely changed how we were engaging in the workforce. People were just not going into the office. Everybody started to move online. And that forced everybody, especially in tech, to think, hey, we're in a new era and we're going to have to scoop up as many people as possible who can help us build the digital infrastructure to support the work from home reality that we all are in. And that led to probably the strongest IT hiring market we have ever seen in the 2022 era. And I think we still are benchmarking what we expect in the labor market to that time period, because, hey, impressions are sticky. And we've come down from that high a little bit. People are going back into the office. A lot of organizations realized, hey, maybe we over-indexed a little bit on the IT talent, and we need to pull back a little bit. And so what we're often seeing is more of a market correction than, I think, a wholesale structural change to what's happening in the workforce. If you actually look at what demand is appearing to be for tech workers and for other folks, it's roughly in line with 2019 norms, so before COVID. So in many ways, it's been a reversion back to the realities that we saw. Now, that said, there are some differences. I mean, you look at entry-level hiring, there is a smaller share of entry-level roles, and we'll probably get into why that might be. And there's also been a bit of a shift away from a lot of what people have traditionally called higher skilled or white collar roles towards more demand for some of the more blue collar or skilled trades professions. And again, we can get into some of the reasons for that. But a lot of this structural shift in that respect has been driven not by new technologies, not by AI, but really been driven by demographics and other broad macro trends. We have an aging population, we have declining birth rates, we have declining immigration rates, we have declining labor force participation rates. All of that is creating a perfect storm that's driving a wedge between supply and demand for workers. And the fields that are being hit the most are often those skilled trade fields. And so one of the reasons why it feels like we have much more labor market pressure for those types of roles is because we just don't have enough people to fill those roles. And for a long time, we told everybody, hey, go get a college degree. And that's the best path to a high-paying occupation. And it still is in many cases, but now for the first time in at least recent history, we're starting to see that it feels as though we have a surplus of college-educated workers and we have a deficit of some of those skilled trade workers. And so I think that's leading to some of the perceptions that people are feeling that, oh, the sky is falling when it comes to entry-level work, especially for college grads, and we don't know what is going to happen next. And it's easy to find scapegoats in that scenario because, whenever you enter into uncertainty, there's going to be a lot of anxiety. It's going to lead to an information vacuum, and that's going to lead to people coming in with easy solutions that often serve their own means. And I think that's what you're seeing in the market today.
Yeah. How much of it? So there's a couple of observations I have as just somebody who's living in the space, and I help a lot of people get tech jobs, and I remember because I was in my formative early years of my career during the dot-com crash. And I just remember this environment where if you could spell HTML, $70K a year job, Silicon Valley, just walk into any company, hey, I can build a website. And one of the things I like to point out to the junior people I mentor today is back then people paid me a lot of money to build basic websites. Today, nobody will pay me to build their website. Not my rates. Like, you're going to go to Wix, you're going to go, like, the whole automation and the tools just replacing some high valued skill sets is not new in IT. It's not, AI is nothing new to me because it's just pushing some lower valued skills just down the value chain. But, once the correction happened, all of those people with the superficial skills, within 2 years, they were gone. Yep. They were pushed out of the field. Employers couldn't justify paying them what they were paying them for, what value they were providing. And I think that's something some people forget because they're like, oh, I went to college. I got a computer science degree, so I'm good, right? And it's like, well, no, you're not. What can you do that justifies the value that you bring to the organization? And that's always the calculus. And when you're managing your career, I always tell people, like, especially with the way things have evolved, like, there is no more 60 years golden watch, pension, all that stuff. Like, you got to manage your career like it's a business.
Yeah.
And when a business isn't getting enough value for what they're spending, and that's how you need to think about your career. Just, how can I increase my value? How can I learn more things? How can I stay where there is demand? And paradoxically, that demand is not always in the hot new tech. Like, there's a great demand for COBOL developers still because, COBOL developers are literally dying. Yep. But the thing I'm always advising junior people is, like, look at what everybody else is doing, and you want to be able to do that, but you want to be able to do some other things too.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. No, you said a couple of really interesting and important things in that. And I think the first is just that, the reality is skills are always shifting. You're always going to need some new capability. You're always going to need new knowledge bases, new skill sets in tech. You're always going to need to know, maybe it's a new programming language, maybe it's some new technology that you need to learn how to integrate across an organization. Whatever it may be, the skill mix is very frothy. And you're going to need to be a continuous learner and continuously update your skill sets. And if you kind of ride the wave of those emerging skills, you're going to be just fine. It takes work. It requires you to be a continuous learner. But it's also the path to a more sustainable, lucrative career. If we look at some of the emerging skills, for example, whether it's AI-related skills right now, whether it's been cloud in the past, whether it's been some data science-related skills in the past, whatever they may be, when you look at those high-growth skills that are having a moment, oftentimes they will command salary premiums of $15,000, $20,000, in some cases even $30,000 or more.
Or in Meta's case, $100 million, right? Like,
that's if you really hit the jackpot. Then
you're
doing
I think Zuckerberg's insane, but okay. I mean, he's got more money clearly than he knows what to do with.
Sometimes all it takes in your career is knowing how to profit off of insanity. Yeah. But the reality is, if you're riding that wave of whatever the hot skill of the moment is, then you're going to be doing just fine. But you do have to take a continuous learner approach to developing your skill set. And I think that ties into the second thing you said, which is really important, which is you do need to manage yourself like a business. And you need to not just focus on whatever narrow set of skills are going to be relevant for whatever job you're working on at a certain point in time. but you need to focus on a more holistic set of skills that are going to be durable throughout the entirety of your career. And so this actually is something that ties into some research I've done a few years ago, where we looked at what were the quote unquote new foundational skills for the digital economy. And this wasn't just focused on tech workers, but it certainly has a lot of application for tech workers, because we were asking, okay, what are those new enduring skills that are going to be important for anybody in an increasingly digital world? And historically, when you talked about foundational skills or durable skills, power skills, whatever you want to call them, you would say, we're talking about critical thinking, we're talking about communication, we're talking about collaboration. And yeah, those skills are still important. We called those human skills at the time. There's always a new name for them, and they're always going to be important. They're enduring skills. But what we also found is that there are two other buckets of skills that, in today's reality, everybody has to build in their portfolio to some degree. One is what we call digital building blocks. The reality is you can't work today unless you have digital skills. Even I have family members who are professional musicians. They play on 300-year-old instruments, and guess what? They still need to send emails to get gigs. So you have to have some foundational literacy in the digital technologies of the day. But there's a third bucket, which we call business enabling skills, which in some ways I would argue might be the most valuable skills. And those are skills like basic business skills, entrepreneurial skills, even just project management skills. I think of these skills as the ones that help you connect what you're doing to why you're doing it and how it adds value to a diverse set of stakeholders. And I think that touches exactly on what you were saying of you need to know how you're adding value to whoever's writing your paycheck or whoever you want to be writing your paycheck. Because at the end of the day, everything in business comes down to what value are you creating for someone else. And if you can build that mindset early that, hey, I'm trying to figure out what can I do to add as much value to other folks in whatever field I go into, that is going to serve you well throughout the entirety of your career.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to hear it with the data, I mean, that makes perfect sense to me. But, in my career, I actually became a director within like 4 years. Yeah. Of graduating college. I was in a leadership position, and it was genuinely a mix of what you're talking about. I was a better communicator than the other IT people around me. I was a better speaker. I was better at clarifying my thoughts. I often joke that my superpower was explaining shit to people. and what I found early on in my career is that there was always tension, and I think this is true today too in a lot of organizations I see. There was always tension between the technology team and the business team. Because the marketing people want to promise everything, IT has to deliver, and that makes a natural tension. But you also struggle with, and we see this with AI right now. There's a lot of executives out there that just fundamentally do not understand this technology, and those are the ones that are firing people and saying, "Oh, we're just going to replace everybody with AI," which clearly doesn't work yet. And when you have that tension, the people that can kind of put one foot on the business and the technology and kind of bridge that gap and make those people communicate effectively, that really pushes you up the chain. And that's what happened to me. I found that, when I was working for certain companies early on, they'd have meetings between the business and the IT, and the business people would be like, well, bring Eric to the meeting because he actually explains things in a way that we understand. Now, that isn't just something that I genetically was able to do. When I was in college, I already knew how to code because I had taught myself when I was a kid, so I did not get a computer science degree. A lot of people watch my channel and stuff and they think I'm a computer science degree guy. I'm not. I dropped computer science because I wasn't really learning anything new, and I went to information systems, which is in the College of Business. So I took marketing, I took finance, I took accounting, I took sales, and my electives, I took everything in like psychology. And that was just an accelerant to my career. And I've seen that with other people and my peers, just the people that, those human skills that you talked about that are often missing in IT people. Those are the difference makers. I actually interviewed a former student of mine who works for Netflix now. He said the same thing. He said,
Yep.
"Hey, when I'm looking at people early in their career, it's the communicators, it's the critical thinkers, the people that understand how to work within a business. Those are the ones that get the big salaries and the big career arcs. While other people just do the same job for 10 years, and then hopefully they keep their skills current enough that if they have a disruption in their employment, they don't get pushed out of the field."
Yeah. Yeah. No, I definitely see the parallels in my career as well. I mean, I was in a similar position where I advanced fairly quickly. I was also in a leadership role within a few years. I think at one point I was the youngest VP in the company that I was working for by a fair amount. And it was because I could communicate fairly well, I suppose. I could write all right. I could tell stories with data and in other technical contexts. I remember pretty early on in my career, I was actually told by an executive that we don't really know what to do with you because we weren't expecting you to be able to communicate this effectively this early. And I say that not to try to puff myself up, but because that is really what catalyzed my career arc as well, was not just being able to understand the technical side of things. I would say I was middling at best when it came to a lot of technical things, if I'm being frank. But I think that to the extent I had anything resembling a corporate superpower, it was I had a pretty good sense of what questions were important to ask, not just how to answer them. And I was able to communicate moderately effectively, both in terms of my writing, both, I think, in terms of my speaking. And it is very valuable if you can be that translation layer between what's happening on the technical side and everything else. Because somehow what's happening on the technical side, it's foundational to what the business does in many respects, and everybody else has to understand it. But if they don't have that technical background, it's going to be very difficult. And so there's a lot of value in being that translation layer. And I think that it comes back to some of those skills we were talking about, the human skills, the business enabling skills, in addition to those digital building blocks. That's really what helps you to understand more holistically what's happening both in this corner over here of your organization as well as that corner over there. So I completely agree all of those are incredibly important. And there are a few other things that you said that I thought were pretty interesting as well that I also want to touch upon, because you mentioned, for example, that it's really difficult for a lot of executives to understand AI, and that's true for any emerging tech. Take AI out of it, any emerging tech, that's going to be the case, and that doesn't stop them from speaking very confidently about it. And often what happens, again, in these information vacuums, which you get when you have these emerging technologies that nobody really understands, everybody feels like they have to keep up with the Joneses. And that's exactly where the vendors want you to be, because that means that if you're a CEO and you're scared and you're trying to keep up with what you think everybody else is doing, that's going to lead to some rash decision making. You're probably going to throw money hand over fist at whatever latest, greatest, shiny toy a vendor throws in your face. And you're probably going to speak with a lot of confidence about it, because you need to exude confidence when you don't actually know something. And I often find that there's this inverse relationship between how confidently someone says they know something and how well they actually do. So I think that if you can be that person, again, who both understands, at least on a foundational level, what's happening on the technical side, while still understanding, at least on a foundational level, what's happening everywhere else, sometimes that'll catalyze your career to heights you never would have thought possible if you had just doubled down on one field, which is often what you are taught to do by a lot of traditional training providers or just other career gurus, career coaches, what have you. So I do think that having that more holistic set of skills is really, really important.
Yeah. And it's one of the things that's really frustrating to me right now, as a long-term professional, with my experience, is the AI hype. And I want to be clear, I do think that what's going on right now has value, and I think and I do believe it. It's fundamentally changed the way I work. I'm not a Luddite. I don't like avoid AI tools. I use them, but I use them responsibly, knowing their limitations and things like that. But the part that's really concerning to me is that a lot of companies are abandoning what I would call engineering.
No.
Because usually when you have a team of engineers, The process is the executive team or the stakeholders come to you and they say, we have a problem. And it's the engineer's job to find a solution to that problem. But right now, and we saw this in the dot-com crash as well, in the lead up, the stakeholders are saying, you need to use AI. Well, that's not engineering. That's not what engineering is. You don't go to, well, I guess some people do because they do their own research, but you're not supposed to go to the doctor and tell the doctor what your problem is and what he should prescribe. You're supposed to describe your problems, and they're supposed to evaluate your symptoms, and they're supposed to prescribe you a solution. And that's how engineering is supposed to work too. But we're seeing the hype is getting so extreme that we're forgetting that, and now you see companies like, oh, we're AI first now, everybody, you have to use this. We're going to measure how much you use this. And I just wrote a piece about it on my Substack a little bit ago about Goodhart's Law. Like, if you measure something, you're going to get more of it.
Yeah.
And if you're measuring people's use of AI, well, what are you really getting as value? You're not measuring value. You're just measuring that they're spending a bunch of tokens, and more code and more output is not correlated all the time to better value and better outcomes. And I see that, and that's where my red alert signs go off. And some people misinterpret that as, oh, you're a big anti-AI guy. I'm like, no, I'm anti not doing engineering properly guy.
Yeah. No, I mean, the hype train is at full steam right now when it comes to AI. And I completely agree that it is a hype-worthy technology. It is very impressive what LLMs can do, what generative AI can do. Like, it is fundamentally changing a lot of things that we took for granted about where humans were adding value within the workforce. Somehow, though, even with one of the most transformative technologies, if not the most transformative technology we have ever encountered, it's still managed to be overhyped. I'm at the point where I think that if you look at how much value something actually adds and how much value it is hyped to add, it's an exponential curve, not a linear one, when you track that, because it is just shocking, some of the claims that people are making, and they're coming out constantly. And some of these claims have been made for many years, and you kind of have to contextualize them against a very, very long history of outlandish AI claims, right? We think, oh yeah, Elon Musk has been saying this, or Sam Altman's been saying that for a few years. And like, yeah, that's true. But guess what? You had computer scientists back in 1970 saying that within a few years, we would have machines that were as capable, if not more so, than humans at any task we currently perform. And if we're lucky, they're going to keep us as pets. That was Marvin Minsky, famous computer scientist back in the day, who said that. And I think that, it's inevitable with something like this, that with a new technology, especially one that's already been, hyped up by Hollywood over the years, and you already have all these visceral images of AI gone wrong in your head, that there's going to be a lot of hype, there's going to be a lot of anxiety around it. Whenever you throw in the vast amounts of capital that are being invested towards AI, you're going to get a lot of hype, because there's going to be a lot of vested interests trying to tell you that this is as transformative a technology as anything ever will be. I think that we should still recognize it is hugely valuable. It is doing some really impressive stuff, but we still need to pause and take caution when we hear some of those outlandish claims, especially if you're a leader. It's like what you were just describing, of companies just saying, yeah, we're not going to hire more people, we're just going to throw AI at every problem, and we're going to just measure how much people are using AI, like, some sort of dystopian Big Brother corporate universe. That's a case of measuring inputs and not outputs. You're assuming that an input is going to lead to a better output, and you stop measuring the output and figuring out, are you actually delivering more value? And you start assuming that the input is an appropriate proxy for value creation or for the output that you want. And in many cases, it just isn't. And we're starting to hear the stories now of AI not always delivering up to the hype. We've heard some companies who leveraged AI, and maybe, chatbot went wrong and, gave a little bit too much of a refund. Or, there was this great study that, it wasn't really a study, but it's kind of almost like a research experiment that Carnegie Mellon did, where they created this fictitious company that was
I read about that.
entirely staffed by AI and AI agents. And they gave this fictitious company a variety of tasks and wanted to see, okay, how well does AI do with these tasks? And they tried a bunch of different AI models. There wasn't one AI model that was able to complete more than about a quarter of the tasks it was given. And most of them were only able to complete about 10% of the tasks they were given. And in some cases, they couldn't even do very simple things like realize that you needed to hit X on a pop-up window before you could complete a task. And there are, other studies that are coming out as well. Apple did, some research where they came out and said, like, hey, you know what, all these quote unquote reasoning models, actually, when you give them more complex problems, their reasoning faculties completely break down. So, again, this isn't to say that generative AI and LLMs in their current state are not hugely valuable transformative technologies. They are, but are they really going to be able to do everything that we currently do? And you're going to be able to replace the huge swaths of your workforce that some CEOs are saying they think they might be able to? I'm not sold on that just yet.
Yeah, I'm not either. And like another study that I read recently came out of Salesforce. And they were studying like the effectiveness of these tools in single turn and multi-turn conversations. And if you don't understand the lingo, multi-turn conversation, that just means you had more than one topic during the customer service call. And they found like similar things. They were just like, well, on multi-turn conversations, it's like 30% accurate, if that. And those kind of studies really jump out at me. Because if there's any company in the industry that really, really wants AI automation to work, it's Salesforce. Yeah. And if Salesforce comes out and says, 30% accurate, that just right there, I'm just like, okay, It's not ready for prime time. Because if it was even within a hand grenade of being ready, Salesforce would be all in. Yeah. And of course, there's CEOs out there saying the things he says, which aren't very bright. But yeah, we're seeing more and more of that when you get down to really measuring things, and I see it in development. I mean, I'm going to do a piece soon. There was a conference video I saw. It was sponsored by AWS, and there was a guy from Stanford presenting, and he was showing like the productivity increases of AI on coding. Mm-hmm. And they did greenfield new development. They did brownfield against existing code bases and stuff, and it showed what I've been seeing, and I haven't been able to talk about it very much, but if it's greenfield and it's low complexity, AI is awesome. Yep. Like if you're just building CRUD applications, like AI is awesome, and it does a really it increases your productivity quite a bit. As soon as the complexity increases, that productivity starts dropping. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that as a professional, there's a couple reasons for that. More complexity means you have to review the code. It's harder to read code than it is to write it. So that productivity decrease makes a lot of sense to me. But then when you move over to brownfield and you're using AI for highly complex things that are already complex and with all their integrations and stuff, the productivity actually drops into the negative territory. Yeah. And as a professional, I'm not surprised by that. Like I said, I use AI tools. I understand the limitations, and I see the same thing. If I'm just building, a tip calculator in React, I can literally just one-shot prompt that. And it doesn't always pick really good, appealing visual styles, but I can fix that. It's not a big deal. But as soon as you put it into a complex integrated code base, it just... Yep. And I think that's why we see a lot of people, when you hear about the vibe coding phenomenon, you see all these people, well, it's greenfield. Most people who don't know how to code are going to do a CRUD app first. So they're like right in the sweet spot of the few things that AI is really good at. And that's kind of why there's a lot of pushback from experienced developers. They're like, well, we're not seeing that. What's going on over here? And I think that chart perfectly explained kind of the divergence of the experiences between these people.
Yeah, and that's not unique to development either. There is actually a growing body of research that finds that we just described of AI being great for a lot of simple, low complexity tasks, but less great for higher complexity tasks. That's true in many fields. I mean, there's been research, looking at similar phenomenon within, financial services and, financial advisory work. Seen it in some other fields as well. And I think that is leading to this interesting situation where companies, I think, are starting to come around to this realization as well that, okay, AI seems better with some of the low complexity tasks, not great with some of the more complex tasks. We're going to need an experienced person in the loop for those higher complexity, more novel situations. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, some companies then are starting to think, well, does that mean I need more experienced folks and fewer entry-level workers? And I think to the extent that I'm willing to say maybe AI is having an impact on the workforce, I would say there are probably some companies out there that they might not have explicitly chopped off a lot of headcount because of AI, but they might have at least reduced some of their hiring or taken a more cautious approach to hiring as they see how AI shakes out, especially for some of those entry-level roles. Mm-hmm. And I worry about that because it's a scenario where you save a few dollars today and then you have to pay a lot more in the future, because where's the next generation of experienced workers going to come from? And you are manufacturing a future talent shortage of your own doing, unless you're betting on AI becoming super intelligent within the next few years, and then you can just, fork money over to Sam Altman or whomever at that point for the latest and greatest super intelligent AI. The problem with that, though, is guess what? If you're doing that, everyone else is as well. And you have just thrown any competitive differentiation out the window because you're just relying upon somebody else's technology and that everybody else is. And that's not a way to actually differentiate yourself in a competitive market. So I think that the companies that think they are being good stewards of their organization by pausing headcount, especially at the entry level right now, and maybe investing more in new AI technologies as opposed to investing in their people alongside the AI, they're actually the ones who long term I think are going to feel the biggest squeeze by not investing in their talent pipeline, not investing in the skills and the humans that really differentiate their company, and instead are doubling down on a tech that's increasingly becoming more commoditized by the day.
Yeah. I've made a lot of comments about the lack of a moat. Like if you can vibe code a SaaS app in a weekend, that means everybody else can too. So yep. What are you really selling at that point? Nothing. The other thing that I find interesting about the entry level issues, because like CS grad unemployment has roughly doubled. I think it's sitting around 7.5-8% the last time I saw the stats. And part of this, because you work in data, like one of the things I teach a lot is just basic data literacy, and you always have to pay attention to the narrative of what the publisher is trying to sell you. Mm-hmm. And when you see something like that, like, oh my gosh, it's doubled, it's 7.5%. Well, that means 92.5% of people are still getting jobs. Yep. Like, it's not, the sky is not falling. And I'm sure if you're a computer science student sitting in a classroom today and you think about like the 100 people in your major, I'm sure that you can find 8 of those people that aren't very good. Yeah. like that's just normal curve right there. Like the people at the bottom of the normal curve are really going to suffer in this type of market. But then, conversely, during the .com bubble and, other bubbles, the 2000 or 2022 bubble and stuff like that, 2000 bubble, 2020 bubble. Wow, I can't even get my ears straight anymore. I'm getting too old. But, during those periods, all of those people are getting picked up. Yeah. And then also in IT in particular, unlike some other fields, experience has an extreme premium in IT. And a lot of juniors, a lot of entry-level people, they don't really realize how much of a dice roll they are when you hire them. Because, when I hired juniors in the past, I'm expecting pretty much zero productivity out of them for 3 to 6 months. Yeah, they got to learn the systems. They got to learn to grow up. Most of them in college, they don't learn how connected systems work. So I'm basically hiring them expecting a loss for 6 months, and then they'll creep up to be neutral, and then hopefully after a year or two they'll be worth the money. Well, when we have a correction like this, and there's a lot of experienced people that have been displaced, nobody's picking a junior over somebody with 2 years of experience.
Yeah.
That's just the reality of the situation. But juniors there's still jobs. Juniors are still getting them, but you have to differentiate yourself now. And that's where I'm telling people, like, just sitting and going through your college classes is not enough. You're not going to stand out. You need to learn how to build connected systems. You need a better portfolio. You need a networking strategy. You need, to work on, your human skills and things like that, so that when you do get those interviews, you can perform in them. And that's a really tough pill for people to swallow. Going back to what you were talking about, we've spent years convincing everybody, like, oh, just get a college degree, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
That was never true, but it was more true, 5 years ago than it was today.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I completely agree with all of that. And, we see it in the data too. For a while, when jobs are plentiful, you could get a job fairly easily if you just stuck up your hand and said, yeah, I know a little bit about coding. I know a little bit about this. I know a little bit about that. Companies are willing to take a chance on you. Now, the market has shifted. It is tougher out there. And companies are starting to place a stronger premium on other types of skills that you just mentioned. We talked about critical thinking a little bit. If you look at critical thinking in jobs that also require AI skills, for example, they are 129% more likely to ask that you have critical thinking. They're also similarly much more likely to ask that you have various business skills, leadership skills, and all of these other non-tech skills that now companies are saying, we're going to ask for the moon. We're going to ask you to be more of a purple unicorn. And it's not just true in AI jobs, it's true in other, tech fields as well. And I think that the people who do stand out in the hiring process are the ones who bring that more holistic skill set to the table and didn't just rely upon what courses they took to learn the skills that they need. Now, there is one additional wrinkle to all this, though, that we haven't talked about yet, which is the role that automated hiring systems play in the hiring process, especially for entry-level folks. And notice I didn't just say AI hiring systems, because a lot of them, they call it AI, but maybe it is, maybe it isn't.
It's roughly keyword pattern matching.
Exactly.
Machine learning light.
Yep, exactly. And so these systems, although, you mentioned this earlier, I've been talking about how the actual hiring managers, they all say, I want somebody with strong critical thinking skills. I want someone with strong human skills. I want someone with those underlying durable skills that I can then mold by teaching them the technical skills I need. Those aren't the skills that they're hiring for. Mm-mm. Those aren't the skills. Those aren't the keywords that those pattern matching and keyword matching technologies are looking for. So just to get your foot in the door, you have to be able to pass that automated filtration. And it's getting harder and harder because, now those systems are becoming pickier and pickier as companies start to pull back on hiring, even if it's just a little bit compared to what it was. And at the same time, you have a huge influx of new graduates relative to how much entry-level demand there is. And that is leading to this environment where AI is just, filtering out 90% plus of people before a human ever, I said AI, the automated systems, they start to filter people out before anybody, a human, actually sees that person's resume or engages with that person. And I think this is a case where the hiring process for many companies has become very dehumanized. And as a result, no one's happy. Like you think, oh, it's big bad employers, they're just not giving opportunities. Like, guess what? The employers aren't happy either.
No, they want to get work done.
Exactly.
Like, I have deadlines to hit. I have goals to hit as a leader. And if I don't have enough, people in the seats to row, like I can't steer the ship.
Exactly. And so these tools that supposedly were going to be HR's salvation because they were going to automate all of this and they were going to lead to better matches and all of that, it's not coming to fruition. They have handcuffed employers because they can't fill the jobs because they're just not seeing enough people, and they're not seeing the people they want to see in many cases. And it's bad for the individuals because it becomes harder and harder to actually be seen by a human. And you have to apply to, in some cases, hundreds of jobs before you even get interviews. And it's, again, I think kind of this dystopian future where this technology was supposed to benefit everybody and has done the exact opposite. And so I also say, if you're looking for a job these days, like you have to understand the realities of those systems and figure out, how do you both build the skills that actually matter while communicating the skills to those machines that they're going to be looking
while playing the game. Buzzword
Exactly.
bingo or whatever the game you need to play.
It's another form of communication skill that you need to develop.
Yeah, exactly. And the hiring thing right now is really complicated because because of what I do, I talk to a lot of hiring managers. I work with a lot of companies. I build training programs and onboarding programs for them. And the thing I've been hearing over the last 6 months, it's gotten really bad. I talked about it like a year ago that this was coming, but it's gotten really bad where an employer will open a role and within 24 hours they're getting hundreds and hundreds of resumes because now the candidates have the automated tools as well. So there's services now. I can put my resume in there and it will tweak my resume for the job role and it will just mass apply. I don't have to write anything. I don't have to click buttons. I don't have to go through Workday, any of that. And it just spam applies. So I'm hearing from hiring managers like, yeah, we're getting 200 applications in the first 24 hours, and maybe 3 of these people are qualified.
Yeah.
Because there's also a lot of fake candidates, especially in IT where there's high salaries. And because if you luck your way into one of those roles, well, yeah, eventually you're going to be found out and fired, but most companies take 3 to 4 months for that, and you're going to make, $40,000-$50,000 and not have to really do anything of value. And there are bad actors who do that. And the hiring managers I'm talking to are just fit to be tied. They don't know what to do because they don't have systems that are capable of finding these people. Yeah. And it's even more complicated than that because, I also work with universities and there's documented evidence. There's grade inflation. People are getting degrees that don't have actual skills. Like, not all professors are bad. Not all universities are bad, obviously, but there are problems with degrees no longer being as strong of a signal of qualifications as they used to be. Yeah. And I think that's the bigger problem for colleges. I don't necessarily agree that the university degree is useless, but I think it's becoming less indicative of success because universities are not keeping their standards up to date. And now we've got AI coming in there, and I was watching a demo the other day where now that they have the agents and the automation tools, it opened up a browser, it logged into Canvas, it went through the material, it took all the quizzes. So we are now in a world where a student could potentially earn a degree from a real, not a degree mill, but from a real university, only doing like 10% of the work.
Yeah.
And if universities allow this to continue, it is going to destroy the value of the college degree. They are going to suicide, basically, their value if they don't figure this out. And part of what I'm having a lot of conversations about right now is what is the proper mix, because the tools are here, they're here to stay, you need to understand them, you need to be able to use them. But if you only do that, you don't develop the critical thinking, you don't develop the other skills that you need. So what is the proper mix? And I don't think anybody has that answer yet. But it's very concerning to me to watch because I feel like things are going too fast on this side and academia is usually really slow to respond.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I work with a number of universities as well, and I've had a lot of conversations with them on this topic. It's the one everybody is grappling with. I agree. I don't know of anybody who's really figured it out. But it is, I always hate to use this word because it's overused, but it's close to an existential crisis for a lot of these universities because if you are intended to be an institution of learning and people can go through your institution without actually learning much, then what are you doing? And I think that there has already been a significant amount of dilution in the value of degrees, or at least the perceived value of degrees in the market, partially because it became more common, because everybody was told you should go to college, partially because a lot of universities, let's be honest, they had degrees that were producing graduates who didn't have skills that were tethered to what added value at various points in time. And I think that that has led to this rise of skills-based hiring, which I think is good in many respects, where companies, for anybody who doesn't know what skills-based hiring is basically this push to focus more on the underlying skill sets that are important for a particular job that you're trying to fill, as opposed to using proxies for proficiency, like a degree or like a certification or other things that don't always effectively signal that somebody truly has the skills for a particular job. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't. And so I think that
I was doing it before it was cool. Like when I became a hiring manager and I was that young, I explained to you my college experience that I already knew how to code. So I never put a premium on degrees when I was hiring. And my hiring process was always come in, we're going to sit down, we're going to pair program together. I'm going to see how you approach your work, how, and what you know how to do. And then I'm going to make a decision about whether I liked that experience pair programming with you. And that was always really good for me. I mean, I always had really good hires doing that. But
Oh, it's and you hear that from so many people, and we see it in the data. I mean, one of the things that I've been looking at over the past few years is what actually happens when you hire that person who doesn't have the pristine resume, doesn't have every credential under the sun and all these fancy acronyms after their name, or didn't go to the most prestigious university, because we're conditioned to think those are the best hires, right? Those are the folks everybody is paying money hand over fist to try and bring onto their teams. And what we found is that when you actually expand the aperture of your talent pipeline and you hire some of those people who maybe have non-traditional backgrounds, maybe didn't get a college degree, maybe just don't look as good on paper for some reason, that they're usually the folks who stick around longer. And you usually get a really strong ROI. Your hiring costs go down because you have a larger candidate pool and you don't have to leave the job rec open as long. And also you don't have to, frankly, pay the astronomical salaries that sometimes you're paying these, purple unicorns who have a very limited set of skills that everybody wants. And I really liken this to hiring for missionaries versus mercenaries. Everybody goes off after the mercenaries, but when you hire the missionaries, you're investing in them, and then they become more invested in you because you gave them that shot. And they're more likely to stick around. There are many spillover benefits in terms of company culture, in terms of team engagement. And I saw this firsthand as a hiring manager when I was at a previous company. We had a team it was a very technical team, data scientists, a lot of folks doing some pretty sophisticated analytics, data engineering. I was the least technical person on the team, frankly.
Which tells you how high that bar is, because if you don't know Will, he is actually a data munger. He's very technical.
I enjoy the data. I do enjoy the data, but I also know my limitations, and we had some brilliant people on that team. And, a lot of them came from, maybe it was a less prestigious university. Actually what we did that I would say was probably the most valuable thing we ever did from a hiring perspective was we started bringing on people before they had their degree as interns or whatever you want to call them. Some people talk about apprenticeships, internships, whatever. Whatever it is, it's somebody who is coming on doing something resembling work-based learning, and they're actually doing the work. They're not just grabbing you coffee or whatever, and they're building the skills. And at one point, I think we had something like 90% of our team had come through our internship program, because we just found people, brought them on early. We liked them, they liked the work, and we would try to find full-time positions for them, and they would stick around. I remember we went through a merger, and we had, I think, the lowest turnover in the company during a merger. We had people sticking around. We had the highest engagement rates, from what I heard in some of the internal pulse surveys, and we were also the fastest growing team in terms of revenue. within the entire company. Even in down years, we were seeing double or triple digit growth in some cases. And I really attribute a lot of that to the fact that we tried to invest in our people. We tried to drink our own juice. We were giving recommendations to companies on how to build career pathways and expand their talent pipelines. And we did that as well. And I know that talking about anything related to DEI is a dirty word these days, but at the time we didn't have any diversity measures or anything like that. We didn't have any targets or anything. And, at one point I just kind of looked around and I was like, wait, I'm the only white guy on the team. Right. And it just naturally, shook out that way by expanding the aperture of our talent pipeline. We got more diversity of candidates, not just in the superficial types of diversity, but diversity of thought, which is really what you need on a team. And I think that, just all of the spillover benefits were very clear to us. And I see it in the data when I look at companies that are taking a similar approach to investing in growing their entry-level talent. They're not just hiring for people from prestigious universities. They have lower turnover rates, they have lower hiring costs, and all of the spillover benefits are just abundantly clear in the data.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And back when I was running my coding boot camp, 10 years ago, I saw the same thing. Companies that would hire my boot camp graduates, at the time, the market was better than it is right now today. But when the market is hot for IT people, you probably know better than me because you do the stats on this, but I remember the average tenure of an IT person was 18 months or something ridiculous. It was really short. Yeah. And then I found that because my boot camp students were typically non-traditional, the companies that hired them, the average tenure was more like 4 or 5 years. Yeah. For the people they hired out of my program, because those people realized that they didn't have the CS degree and they were being given an opportunity and they were grateful for that opportunity. And just to make it through a boot camp, you have to have some rigor and some grit, which, is also something that's pretty rare in a lot of candidates. And I saw that play out as well.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it's a great illustration of, the value of hiring folks from some of those more non-traditional backgrounds, many of whom do go, through boot camps and similar programs. I think there are, a couple of other benefits too that, get lost in a lot of employers, but are really powerful. And one is, you hear the common complaint, oh, well, what if we invest in training these people and they leave? Right. Well, and, most people say, well, what happens if you don't train them and they stay? Which, that's a good answer. But I think there's something else that gets lost in that. If you become the employer that has a reputation for training people up, and then helping them launch their career to the stratosphere, guess what? Everybody's going to want to work for you. Oh, yeah. You are never going to have a problem hiring anyone again. You are a talent magnet. You should want people to leave. Obviously, you want them to stick around for a little while, but you should want people to leave and go on and conquer the world, because that means everybody else who is ambitious and capable is going to want to work for you if you become the employer with the brand of being a launch pad for someone's career. So that is hugely valuable. The other thing that is hugely valuable is if you invest in training people and building them up and not just hiring folks who come off the street with all the skills you're looking for, then you are able to mold them in the image that you need them to be. You can help them build the skills that are going to be most impactful for your organization, because guess what happens when you hire somebody who has all that experience and all these skills and they know how to do things right? Well, what was right for them in the past might not be right within the context of your organization. They might bring the wrong playbook to your team. And if you can help to grow your folks while still bringing in people with those skills, because they can help mentor young people, you still want a good diversity of skills on your team and different experience levels. But if you can help to build people up and impart the skills that are going to be most valuable within the context of your organization, then again, I think you're going to have a higher performing team than if you just go after all the ringers and all those mercenaries who are bringing with them legacy playbooks that may or may not be good fits for your team.
Yeah, agreed. And you know, anybody who has experience leading teams, it is amazing how destructive one bad hire can be on a team. It is incredibly destructive to morale, motivation. You know, a lot of times, even when you have that bad hire, it takes you time to recognize it because you're a couple levels up, but the people on the ground know within a day or two.
Yeah.
And then you start seeing your top performers leave, and it's then like, well, now not only do I need to get rid of this person and replace them, but now I've lost momentum because my top performers are leaving.
Well, and now I worry what happens if AI becomes that bad hire, right? If that comes on and companies actually do what they say they're going to do and start incorporating AI and agents into the workforce, in some kind of hybrid blended AI plus human workforce, then what happens when people realize, hey, the AI isn't actually performing up to snuff? You know, if it is only getting things right 30% of the time, or even if it got things right 70% of the time or 90% of the time, but goes horribly wrong the rest of the time, what's that going to do for morale? What's that going to do for your team when they see that you just invested in this new technology that isn't that great, saved them a lot of money, but is putting downward pressure on their wages and their jobs? Like, the people who are still there, it's going to just kill their morale if you don't do it in a thoughtful way. And so, that's another thing that I've been working with a lot of companies on is how do you actually implement AI in a thoughtful way that is, yes, high ROI, because that's another problem right now. A lot of these AI initiatives are not high ROI, so there has to be value. And I tell companies that in addition to value, you also have to think about the risk and the complexity of implementing AI. And if you find workflows that AI scores highly on across value, risk, and complexity, like, great, that sounds like a fantastic candidate to start leveraging AI. But spoiler alert, there's a relatively small number of tasks right now that give you a commensurate value relative to the risk and complexity of implementing AI, where it actually would make sense to fully automate something. The reality is, I think we're going to be living in more of an augmented world than an automated world for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I'm seeing with the clients I'm working with. I've actually built RAG systems and things like that for pilot projects. And I think Gartner came out recently and they said something like 71% of AI projects are going to be canceled in the next 12 months. And I'm seeing the same thing, the full human replacement. But I like what you said about the other risks that people aren't really thinking about. Because I've seen it, like, you're a customer service rep. Okay, they put the AI chatbot in front of you, so you have to go through the chatbot before you get to the human. The chatbot does a bad job. Well, now you're inflicting a pissed off customer on your human CSR.
Yep.
And you're making their job so much worse and so much more stressful when if the human had just talked to the customer right away and solved their problem, the whole outcome and the customer's perception and the CSR's perception would be radically different. Yep. And I like that you brought up, because that's something I've been talking to a lot of executives about, is like, hey, you got to be careful about these other things, especially if you're a premium service, if you're a luxury brand. There is an expectation at certain price points that you're not going to have a chatbot that hallucinates 30%, whatever. Yep. Even 30% of the time is probably too much if you're selling Ferraris.
Yeah.
That thing needs to be at like 99% before you can put it in front of a luxury service or a premium brand.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And, I think, it's interesting you bring up customer service, because that is one of the fields, one of the very few fields, if not the only field, where we do see some evidence in the data that maybe AI is taking some jobs. Recently I released a piece where I was looking at that question of, okay, is AI actually taking people's jobs? Is it killing jobs like everybody says? And if you actually look at the data, the vast majority of jobs, even those that supposedly are most exposed to AI, they've been growing since 2022, which is when ChatGPT came on the scene. And the exception to that, however, is customer service and some of the rote administrative roles that they were already declining before ChatGPT, but I do think that it was an accelerant in that process. But to your point, that doesn't mean that it's actually always good for companies to do that. Maybe you save a few dollars here and there by automating the customer service function. And maybe it's a necessity if you just can't find enough people. That's a whole nother question, going back to the demographic challenges we were talking about. But if you have a choice, then the trade-off is you save some money here on the customer service reps, but you might lose some money over here by pissing off your customers. Right. You know, it's exactly like you were saying. And we've all been there, right? We've all been in a scenario where we have an issue, we got to call someone up, whether it's a cable company, whether it's whomever, and the chatbot is slow, doesn't understand you, you can't get in touch with a human, people just start screaming at their phones. It's infuriating. You know, I had this experience recently.
How many times have you called up a service and you hit the call tree and you immediately just hit 0 or say representative?
Yep.
Because you know that the problem you're calling about is not something that's going to be fixed through a call tree.
Yep. Oh yeah. Well, and I had this happen recently. It was actually a great juxtaposition recently where I had 2 customer service issues at the same time. I called one company up and I couldn't get a human. I just was going through the automated system. It was buggy. I think it hung up on me. I had to call back, and I left that interaction more infuriated with any company that I have ever been infuriated with. And then right after that, I had to call this other company, get on the phone right away with a human, and she's bubbly, she's friendly, she solves everything within 2 minutes, we're done. They got a customer for life. The other company, I'm avoiding them like the plague, if at all possible.
Yeah. I had a similar. I actually, I don't sponsor my channel or anything, but I buy a lot of my audio video equipment from Sweetwater, and it's the same thing. If you've ever purchased from Sweetwater, like the first time I made an order, I ordered like a $1,200 microphone, and I ordered it online. I didn't even call. I ordered it online. It showed up. But after I placed the order, I got a call within 24 hours from a human being. And they're just like, hey, see that you're a new customer. Want to make sure everything's okay. Here's my personal extension. If anything's not right about your order, you can call me personally. And I was like, I'm going to buy all my equipment from Sweetwater.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's something, a lot of companies are really, really going to have to think about.
Yeah, and they're going to have to view it as an investment, not a cost center. I think that's what people are defaulting to. They say, well, this isn't directly revenue generating, right? It's just a nice to have, but if we can automate that, great. It's like, no, that can be your secret sauce. Like, I feel like we've entered this world where we think that customer service and the human touch is a nice to have, but we might be circling back around as more companies try to automate more. That might become your differentiator as an organization, is if you didn't lose the human touch. I really think there's still going to be a lot of value in that. And again, we're starting to see that in the data. Now, increasingly, companies are already coming around to that realization. We're actually seeing a huge uptick in demand for those human skills, like critical thinking, communication, collaboration, et cetera. That's growing in the data we're looking at. It's also starting to come with more of a salary premium again. And so I think it'd be really interesting to see how this shakes out over the next few years. You know, a couple of years ago, right when ChatGPT came on the scene, I wrote this article in Forbes where I was basically arguing that AI has the potential to make tech jobs more human. And so far, that's what we're seeing in the data.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm noticing that, just the communication skills just really ramping up. And even beyond that, if you think about these AI tools, these LLMs, they're large language models. The better you prompt, the more effectively you communicate with the AI tool, the better your outcomes are going to be, the better results it's going to produce. So if you're not a good communicator, you're not going to be a good, I don't think prompt engineering is a real job, but you're not going to be good at it. I can tell you that.
Completely agree. Yep. And it's actually just a side note on prompt engineering, because, I thought it was interesting how everybody rushed to say prompt engineers were the job of the future when ChatGPT came on the scene, and now nobody's saying that. But, we did look at the data. Prompt engineering actually was the fastest growing skill in tech from 2023 to 2024. But guess how many prompt engineers there were? Virtually none. So this, I think, is a great example of a new technology creating a new skill that doesn't actually coalesce into a new job, but it gets dispersed across existing jobs. And I think that's largely going to be the story of AI more broadly, is a powerful new tool that may cause some disruption on the margins, but for the most part, it's not going to disrupt entire jobs or the headcount necessarily, but it is going to disrupt the types of skills that people need to develop and leverage on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah. And even beyond that, I often talk to people about, the myth of finite work, because I see this argument online, and it's usually people who aren't business savvy, or they're college kids or somebody just without the life experience. And they say, oh, well, if AI makes developers 30% more productive, that means if you have 10 developers on your team, you're going to fire 3 of them. And I'm always like, have you ever worked in an enterprise? Because every quarter you have a backlog of things and you pick winners. No, I've never been in a company where they were like, well, all the work is done. So if you get a 30% productivity increase, that usually just means you're going to go deeper into your backlog. You're going to do more features. You're going to do more experiments. You're going to build more stuff. It doesn't mean you're just going to cut 30% of your workforce. Now, if your CEO is a psychopath, they might actually do that, but I believe that's just going to sabotage your business, because the other companies that take that productivity and leverage it into product improvements and stuff, they are going to eventually eat your lunch.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think that's a great call out, because like everybody who says that, oh, we're on pace to lose however many jobs or whatever, or AI is going to automate all these roles out of existence, it is fundamentally based on that assumption that there's a finite amount of work, and that you cannot be creative enough to find other ways to redeploy those people, which in many cases, knowing some of the executives out there, that might be the case, but
it is.
I think that, to your point, the companies that know how to redeploy those people, that know how to find other opportunities to deliver value and to either deal with some of that backlog or just find other ways to leverage people's skill sets, they're going to be the ones who win over the next few years, because they're not just going to be sitting on their hands saying like, oh, well, we automated all the work and we're doing the same stuff we were doing, so we're good now, right? And we just saved a lot of money. I'm going to look good to my board and my investors. It's the people who actually continuously invest in growth and new creative solutions and just new ways to add value that at the end of the day are going to win.
Yeah, I think my favorite new word over the last year, I don't know when it popped up, I think it's in the last year, is inshitification. That is now my favorite word, because that's exactly what some of the companies are doing. They're just like, oh, well, we can use this automation and we're just going to cut everything we can, cut it down to the bone so that we maximize our profitability. But the product gets worse, the experience gets worse, and it's gotten so bad that the internet collectively made up the term of inshitification to describe this process. And I'm like, yeah, I remember before Google existed. I remember before Facebook existed. There is a future where these companies do not exist. That is possible. It is in the realm of possibility. And especially if software gets cheaper to make. And that's another thing I think a lot of the young people that are panicking don't have the longevity to kind of realize this. Like when I started coding, I was learning out of a book. Yeah. There was no Stack Overflow. There was no AI tools. Our developer environments didn't even have autocomplete. You had to type every character.
Yeah.
So I am probably 200 times more productive just because of the tools that I have now.
Yeah.
Than I was when I first started coding. And software development professionals worldwide went from 3 million to 26 million worldwide when we had these massive productivity. So as software becomes cheaper to make, historically we have seen a demand for more software.
Yep.
And smaller companies can now hire developers. They can now have custom products. And if AI makes that even better, well, now David can fight Goliath.
Yeah.
And that's exciting to me as an entrepreneur, as a business person.
Yeah. Well, and you see stories like that throughout the history of automation, right? It's fairly rare that automation just completely uproots one job, replaces it with a new tool, and that's that. It will either create new jobs, or in some cases, even if it is automating a piece of what someone was doing, it doesn't mean that you're reducing demand for that person in many cases. A great example of this is ATMs, right? You go to a bank and you just put your money in, it deposits it, or you take your money out, and you can do some pretty basic things, which historically tellers did. And ATMs, they came out in something like the 70s or the 80s. And back then, everybody thought like, okay, well, tellers are toast. We're not going to have any more of them. Well, what actually happened was two things. One, tellers shifted what they actually did. They became more customer service focused. So they were focusing on higher level, more complex tasks. And even though the average bank branch had fewer tellers because they now had these ATMs, guess what? That lowered the cost of opening a bank branch. And so now you had more bank branches opening. And what this led to was each individual branch might have had fewer people in it, but because there were more branches, that still led to a rise in employment for tellers for decades. And I think that you could definitely see a similar dynamic for many other fields that might be exposed to new automation technologies, where it's also just basic economics, right? As the marginal cost of producing something goes down, or the marginal value goes up, or the marginal productivity goes up, then that means you're going to be able to invest in that more because there's an economic incentive to do so. And so if it becomes less costly to produce software, or becomes more productive to hire one person because they have all these tools at their disposal, if you can justify that economically in terms of more revenue, more profit, whatever it may be, then over time that's going to lead to an increase in employment because there's an economic incentive to hire more of these people who are now more productive.
Yeah, it's always. I mean, we live in a world where you're rewarded for clicks.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of clickbait, but a lot of these topics are just way more nuanced than the media and influencers would like. So.
Indeed.
All right. So this was great. Thank you for coming on and talking with me today. As a wrap, just how can people follow you? How can people, because I recommend my audience, you should be following people like Will because they do have their pulse on the industry, on the data. They go way deeper. I have a lot of opinions and they are based on data, but most of that data comes from people like Will. So if you want to go directly to the source, you should be following Will. So how should people find you?
And so the easiest way is to either go to my website, FourOneInsights.com. We're publishing new research there and other resources so that you can see some of the trends that we're following in the market. We'll give you all the data, all the sources, so that if you want to go crazy with it, have fun. But then I also post regularly on LinkedIn, so feel free to find me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to connect there. LinkedIn is just look for my name, Will Markow. And then the last places, I also regularly contribute commentary to N2K Cyberwire, which is one of the largest podcasts in the cybersecurity space. So I do a lot of work analyzing the cybersecurity market as well as the IT job market more generally. So I also will share a lot of commentary there. So between those three, one way or another, I'm sure you can find me, and always feel free to reach out. Always happy to connect with folks, answer questions, or just see how I can be of value to you.
Awesome. And if you have any questions or comments about what we discussed today, leave them in the comments below. We will address them. I try to answer, every comment that is worth answering. That's my caveat. But, thank you again for coming on, and happy coding.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.